Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 22nd of April, 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Alex Thomson, talking from the Netherlands. We've also got Mark Anderson speaking from the United States. And we're very pleased to have Professor Diane Rasmussen McAdie with us, who will be speaking from Scotland. So quite a lineup today. Also, we have no extra to the news today because following the news, we will be playing out the Playing God video. We'll talk about that in our adverts. But just to give viewers a heads up that we'll be finishing the news promptly and then following up with that live stream of that video. Well, where do we kick off with? I think it's got to be Ukraine, and thank you to Alex for sending me this headline earlier this morning. So it's the Telegraph, and the headline is Ukraine's front line is collapsing and Britain may soon be at war. So with comment by Hamish de Breton Gordon, he says, unless we all get a grip, we'll not only be going to polling stations, but to the enlistment centres. And his main point is that while we're all fixed on Tehran and Tel Aviv, Ukraine's front lines are, quote, showing clear signs of crumbling. And there's the real possibility they could crumble, even if the Western weapons and munitions get to them. He says the toll on both sides has been immense. And if we just put up the extra little paragraph there, our stocks of ammunition and especially precision missiles are thought to be perilously low. It's clear we only have a handful of tanks and even less people to crew them. So dire straits in the UK and the West and the European Union, because of course we don't have the weapons and the munitions. We cannot produce them. We have run out of stocks, and the result is that on the battlefield, Ukraine is indeed crumbling, and the Russians are moving forward. This has been happening, of course, for a long time, but Western propaganda has meant that the truth about the failure of Ukraine on the battlefield has been hidden until it's impossible to hide it anymore. We'll just play this little clip here. I'm going to talk over it, but we're going to be seeing the massive Russian pummeling of Ukrainian defences in Ukraine. This is what they're doing, largely with very large air-dropped bombs. This is cluster munitions arriving on the Ukrainian positions. I think that is an small ammunition dump exploding there. But this is the massacre of the Ukrainian forces. And of course, behind the front line, we've got very big attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure. Meanwhile, the Western wonder weapons, Abraham's tanks, are taken off the battlefield. And this is so sad to see, of course, the forcible recruitment of yet more men who will almost certainly be going straight onto the battlefield to die. The West, UK in particular, as we'll see, fully involved in this horrific treatment by the Ukrainian government of its own citizens. I've got another little video clip here. I believe this is Russian troops moving through Avdiivka, and you can see the horrific destruction. It shows you the scale of the fighting. And of course, something which has to be remembered is virtually all civilian buildings were used by the Ukrainian military as defensive points, albeit most of the population had already left, except the people waiting for the Russians to come into position to effectively rescue them. So tragedy on the battlefield. The US has put in more money, 61 billion. And Alex, I'll just bring you in very briefly because you had some comments on that.
Yes, Brian, the big shock here seems to be that the French troops are now on the ground in Odessa. I don't know whether you'll be alluding to that later in your segment, but that does seem to be being confirmed by reputable channels. And we shouldn't forget that this happens against the background of the congressional allocation from the US of $61 billion to Ukraine. And I would like to ask for anyone who has been able to pore over the small print of that congressional allocation to confirm a report that's reached me that $300 million of that US taxpayers' money that's been sent to Ukraine under the name of border security or some such is specifically to ensure that Ukrainians, young men and perhaps soon young women and middle-aged people, will not be able to cross the border largely into Poland to escape the draft. This comes shortly after Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina made a spectacle of himself visiting Kiev and saying it's unacceptable that your under 27s are not being sent to die. I demand that they be drafted immediately.
Yeah, this is tragic stuff. We'll report more of this in coming UK column news programmes. But this is something that caught my attention. I regard it as very sinister. We've now got conservative friends of Ukraine dedicated to strengthening political security, cultural and commercial relations between the United Kingdom and Ukraine, as well as between the Conservative Party and the, quote, growing Ukrainian community in Britain. And if we have a look in the main text, alongside a repeat of the comments about strengthening relations, we get some information that it was founded in 2022 by the Right Honourable Robert Gerrish. And here we've got the Right Honourable, it's very difficult for me to say that, Boris Johnson, who is president of Conservative Friends of Ukraine. Here's a picture of some of the team in forthcoming UK column news editions. I'll be talking more about the chief executive, Maria Timofeyenko. But the key issue here is that we've also got very strange individuals in the background. A news flash, which is up on the website itself, talks about the President, Boris Johnson, and renowned French philosopher, filmmaker, Bernard Henry Levy, working together to support both Israel and Ukraine. If we raise the key points that need raising about this organisation, let's have a look at those questions on screen. We can see that we need to ask a number of things. Who exactly are the people involved with this organisation? What is their real agenda? Which comes first, the interests of Ukraine or UK? And also, is it acceptable that Ukrainian refugees in UK are being given this exclusive power for direct influence and involvement in high-level UK politics? And of course, they're using taxpayers' money. Who is funding this organisation? And how much has been received. And let's just look at Boris Johnson to understand the quality of the president of this organisation.
Because if Ukraine falls, it will be a catastrophe for the West. It will be the end of Western hegemony, and we will have no one to blame but ourselves.
Hundreds of thousands of men, Ukrainians and Russians, being slaughtered as a result of the efforts of Boris Johnson, of course, to stall the peace process. And this is the state of the man. We should be very concerned here in UK that he still has power and influence. Alex, let's bring you in because I think you've got some comments about MPs and replies.
Ukraine is but a Johnny-come-lately compared with the original and best, the Conservative Friends of Israel and Labour Friends of Israel. And before we leave Ukraine, I should say it's entirely disingenuous of Conservative Friends of Ukraine to call Bernard-Henri Lévy a philosophizing filmmaker. He's been running French foreign policy for 45 years, despite many changes of government from left-wing to right-wing, and everyone in France knows that. But let's go on to Christian Wakeford, the Member of Parliament for Bury, north of Manchester, Bury South. There was a debate in February, which Justin Walker, a friend of UK column whom we've interviewed several times, picked up on. And here it was on the Monday, the 19th of February. Mr. Wakeford said the following, I won't read it all out, but he said, when we see a banner saying Zionists not welcome, we know what it means. It means Jews not welcome. Let us call it out for what it is. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. That goes further even than the IHRA definition on anti-Semitism, which is much contested. Justin Walker picked up on this, and again, I won't read it all, but you can freeze the screen. And his point is, because he's an erudite man, particularly in military history, is Justin Walker, he said, I have a personal interest in what you're saying here, because he's just found out about Folke Bernadotte, the Swede who was assassinated by Zionist terrorists, there's no two ways about it, in 1948, specifically because he was calling for a two-state solution with Palestinians and Israelis, as they would become, living in a single peaceful settlement. And he says that his personal interest is that his father, Justin Walker's father, was a Royal Marine Commando officer who had witnessed horrible things being done to Palestinians by the Irgun. And so he says he was truly shocked to read that Folke Bernadotte was murdered by a hail of bullets for Zionists, precisely for aiming for a two-state solution. This was an email sent to Christian Wakeford, a member for Bury South, on the 21st of March. Then he says, I've got a couple of questions for you. What's the difference between what happened in 1948 and the Hamas murders? The big point being in 1948 it was Zionist terrorism. Secondly, do you stand by your statement that attacking Zionism is anti-Semitic? And thirdly, since the two-state solution has now collapsed in 2024, will you support a campaign that seeks to establish Judeo-Palestine, which Justin understands to be a proper respect for the Balfour Declaration? He's followed that up because Mr. Wakeford has, in his silence, insinuated the usual parliamentary protocol, go away, you're not my constituent, you don't live in the geographical area that elected me. And again, without reading at all, Justin wasn't taking this lying down. He said that his late grandfather received a response from Winston Churchill in 1936 on a matter of national importance, and he was certainly not Churchill's geographical constituent. So he says, please, Mr. Wakeford, do not hide behind this ridiculous so-called protocol that you can't enter into correspondence with somebody outside your outside your constituency. Hansard has been falsified by this statement being allowed to lie, so we need to have it corrected. He's now up to his fourth demand for a reply. You stated categorically in Parliament that to be Zionist is to be anti-Semitic, and he's not going to let that go on the record. There are many, of course, inconsistencies in the Hansard record on statements of fact because it's MPs' license to state it. But I think that's just in his constitutionally and morally correct here and doing the record in Hansard a favour by challenging this.
Thank you very much for that, Alex. And of course, all written in a very calm, reasonable way, which is the correct approach when dealing with this very sensitive issue. Well, let's bring in Diane. You're going to give us an update on what's been happening to the Fenethy women, and particularly over the weekend, for me at least. It seems there's some good news. What have you got to tell us?
Absolutely, Brian. Thanks. I'm really happy to be here to report all this good news. First of all, if we can go to the Fenethy Survivors Group Campaign for Justice, which I would like to thank all of you for supporting, including UK Column viewers. Over the last week, we raised £2,744, which is incredible. Our initial target was £1,000, so it's really great that you guys have just blown that out of the water. It's been great. I do have a statement to read here from Marion Reed and Lynn Sheeran, who are the admins of the Fenethy Survivors Group, that they wanted me to share with you today. We 100% appreciate everything they, meaning UK Column and the viewers, have done for us. And as the saying goes, we live to fight another day. But because of their help, we will be able to fight out a lot longer than another day. So massive thanks to all who donated. It's really great. So to go into what happened the past few weeks leading up to last week's committee meeting, we have here a submission from the petitioner. Just a quick review for those of you who may not be familiar with the story. The petition has been for the Fenethy women to access Scotland's redress scheme. And if you remember, the March meeting was very disappointing because Shona Robison said that they do not qualify for the Scotland's redress scheme because their abuse was short term. So part of the response was what they called a primal scream. And this is posted on the Scottish Government website if you'd like to read the whole thing. But just in part, she said, would the Deputy Minister please elucidate on what is an acceptable amount of abuse, as in a long-term abuse and compensatory situation versus a short-term abuse and compensatory situation? For example, would a single rape victim in a long-term care home be allowed redress, whereas survivors in a shorter-term facility enduring many horrors over a 6 to 8 week stay, which is what the Fenethy survivors went through, not be? It just doesn't make sense. how does the Deputy First Minister arrive at the conclusion that short term means no redress? And so what we did from there was we submitted a couple of press releases leading up to this. Here you can see some of the media coverage that was out on the 17th, which was the morning of the meeting. And that was just sort of an announcement saying there's going to be a protest. We're going to try to get some visibility on the case. And so now, first here, I would like to play a clip from the meeting from Fergus Ewing, who was a rogue MSP who gave up an amazing performance in the Petitions Committee meeting as a member. So if we could play that now, please.
At the meeting where we heard from the current Deputy First Minister, I felt that the arguments that were being presented were insupportable, unjustifiable and inexcusable and quite impossible to defend on any basis, frankly. And I've seen the written submission of the 10th of April from the petitioner, some of which has been alluded to. I wanted to make two additional suggestions which at this point are contingent. In other words, they may not require to be resorted to, but I think that they should be if necessary. First of all, I think your suggestion, convener, that we raise with John Swinney the apparent contradiction between the positions adopted by the two Deputy First Ministers, the previous and the current and the previous, is an excellent one. But, at the end of the day, where the second in command adopt two apparently different positions, well, what do? Well, you go to the boss. Yes. You go to the boss and say, look, your two deputies can't agree with each other. Okay, well, one was the previous deputy and not the current First Minister, but he was still the Deputy First Minister of Scotland, and therefore I think we should kind of indicate that we might be minded to seek evidence from the First Minister if we can't get justice for the people that are here today and those who cannot be with us. And in addition, I think it would be helpful to signal a convener that if all of these things prove to be ineffective, then we wouldn't be doing our job unless we go back to the floor of our Parliament and debate this issue there. Yes. Thank you. And
I don't wish to be unkind, but I do sometimes feel like one of the judges in these TV programmes where I have to keep reminding counsel that he's not a witness, he's here to make constructive.
So at the end there, that was the convener of the Petitions Committee, Jackson Curla, commenting on the fact that there are about 30 of us, mostly Finucane survivors in the public gallery, applauding, which I thought was just an interesting contrast compared to what happened in the excess deaths debate last week that Debbie covered with Andrew Bridgen present. Just a bit different in Scotland, I guess. So what we have here next is the official minutes. This is just part of the minutes from the meeting with the formal actions that were recorded, that the committee will agree to invite Redress Scotland to give evidence at a future meeting. It also agreed to write to John Swinney, MSP, who is the former Deputy First Minister, who presents that apparent contradiction, the Law Society of Scotland and Thomson solicitors that are working actually on behalf of some of the issues around the case. It also agreed to add the petition to the short list of possible subjects for the committee to request a parliamentary debate on. The reason to bring in the solicitors and the Law Society is to look at the redress criteria and to see who would or would not be eligible and how the criteria might be amended, which is what I have suggested personally in my evidence. From here, we have some videos that I have to say are UK column exclusives because I did them myself. The first one we should have up here is Colin Smith, MSP, who is the constituent of the leader of the Finucane group, Marion Reid, and I asked him for some comments. And you can hear the jubilance going on in the background. Those are the women having lunch next to us. Mr. Smith, thanks for your appearance today in the Scottish Parliament and the Petitions Committee. How did you feel it went today?
I thought it was really positive. I think for the first time, the women believe that people are actually listening to their plight. The committee gave them their full backing, made it absolutely clear that the current position of the government not to change the redress scheme, to acknowledge the appalling abuse that happened at Finucane, is not a sustainable position. So they've continued that petition, they've called for more action, and that's a small but I think really important step forward for the women.
So what do you think the next steps will be from here?
I think it'll be important for the committee obviously to ask Redress Scotland to come before them to highlight the contradiction that appears to exist between what the previous Deputy First Minister said, John Swinney, and what the current Deputy First Minister is saying as well, and try to shine a light on that. It could be the Petitions Committee will even hold a debate within Parliament on that particular issue, but if they don't, then that's certainly something that I'll bring forward in the future. So it will take time, which is disappointing because we have waited far too long already, but at least we're making a small step forward to try to get justice and recognition over what happened at Fernethi.
Thank you so much to you and the committee and to Mr. Cole-Hamilton. You all did an amazing job today, and I know the women are very happy as we can hear through the windows here. So thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
And the next clip we have here is from Alex Cole-Hamilton, who is my constituent. I would say that Colin Smith has been with the women very consistently from the beginning. Alex Cole-Hamilton has been helpful as well. He and Colin accompanied the women on a trip to Fernethi last summer. And as he is just down the street from me, I decided to pop in and say hello, and he agreed to come. And along with Colin, they both spoke at the committee meeting. So here's Alex Cole-Hamilton.
So what did you think about how the meeting went this morning? We can hear from the jubilance going on in the room there. What did you think?
Well, I've never seen anything quite like this in the Scottish Parliament. In the 8 years I've been here, I've never seen the Petitions Committee so unanimous in support of a group of survivors. I've never seen them so, I think, concerned by the testimony they heard from the Deputy First Minister, who was trying to excuse away the government's kind of decision not to include the Fernethi survivors in the redress scheme. And I am very hopeful that this will mark a turning point in their campaign for justice, because there are thousands of women out there who were sent, without their consent to Fernethi House under the guise of a summer holiday camp, but was in fact a residential school. That's a critical detail.
Absolutely.
And as such, they absolutely deserve justice, and they deserve to have their stories heard, their victimhood recognised, and a full and frank public apology. I don't know a stronger group of women. You can hear that through the door right now.
They're amazing.
I am honoured to be standing with them on this journey, and we're not going to go away. We're not going to give up until we get justice for the Fernethi survivors.
Thank you so much, Mr. Cole-Hamilton. As my constituent, I really appreciate it.
Great to see you.
And we now have one more MSP, a short comment from Faisal Chowdhury, who was a member of the Petitions Committee along with Fergus Ewing.
Chowdhury, thanks very much for all of your work today, Mr. Chowdhury, in the Petitions Committee, and on behalf of the ladies, I'd like to thank you as well as their appointed researcher. What has led you to this point to work so hard for the women and advocate for the justice that they deserve?
I think it's very important listening to everyone and the way they have been treated. I feel that they're not getting the clear answer, and it's taking too long. It's time now. The Deputy First Minister needs to answer and tell everyone what she's planning to do and how is she going to move forward. And as my role, I will keep be pushing it.
Thank you very much again. Thanks so much for your support.
And that's enough from the politicians. Thank you again. However, now we have a clip from Marion Reid herself, who is the Fernethi Survivors Group founder and the co-admin, and we just want to see how happy she was after the meeting.
Marion.
No justice, no peace.
Hello, Marion. No justice, no peace. Absolutely. How do you think the meeting went this morning?
I thought the meeting went fantastic. We're all so in a high, so much in a high. We've waited a long time, and with what happened today, the support we had in the committee room today, just has put everybody up there. We're on a total high now. It's been down there for so long. Finally we're going to get somewhere, I think, but we will just keep fighting, we will keep coming back, and each time our voices will be louder, and we're going to get there at the end of the day.
So happy for you. Congratulations.
Oh, buzzing. So cut that!
Okay, thanks, Marion. So from here, we had some coverage immediately. As you will see on this slide, it was basically mostly, except for the Courier that did some in-depth coverage, there was a story that went across the news wires that basically pulled out Mr. Hamza Yusuf himself as him being pulled into the discussion. As Fergus Ewing said, as I showed at the beginning, this is what's going to happen potentially next. I think it was really interesting considering some things that I will be covering later on in the news about Mr. Yusuf. It's interesting that he was pulled out, even though there were a lot of other actions that will be going on in the meantime that hopefully will help before he's brought in. But this is where things are going right now up here in Scotland. Brian, I know you've really been helpful. Do you have anything that you want to add, or if anyone else has anything to say?
Diane, well, the immediate thing for me to say is well done for what is truly excellent reporting on the Fenethy case. It's really bringing it alive. But of course, it's been a lot of work by your good self and the women themselves, which has produced results. And the final thing I'd like to say is a classic example of people engaging their MPs properly. And so we now see MSPs in Scotland starting to get involved and doing the right thing. And that's been approaching them in the right way, and the persistence of the women over 4.5 years. So I'm going to say thank you very much for that excellent report. Okay, well, UK column only functions by the financial help of its members. Viewers across the world are wonderful, but at the end of the day, it's the people who make a contribution financially that keep us going. And so we'd like to say, please support us, please support the UK column, become a paid up member, join in the community. That's an important thing where you can meet and swap ideas with other like-minded people. You can make a purchase through the UK column shop. And if you have a look online, there's some very interesting products. Sales, of course, help us. And at the end of the day, all of the information which UK column puts out is there to be shared freely with other people. But if you're sharing clips, please do give us a mention. Now, tomorrow at 1 o'clock, we've got a discussion with Tom Nelson going out. That's with Mike Robinson. Tom Nelson, one of the creators of the Climate, the movie. And that's going to be a very interesting discussion. So if you can, tune in at 1 o'clock. Key thing for us today is to say that at the end of the news at 2 o'clock today, there will be a streaming of Playing God. This is the movie that's come together from Anim Mahmood and Ash Mahmood is the film. And of course, this is with Jackie Devoy in the background. And it's an investigation into medical democide in the UK. So a very serious, very important film. And we're going to encourage everybody to watch it and then to support it and to help promulgate it and to share the very important message. We've also got an Alternative View 14 coming up, Riding the Wave. And this is in the Leonardo Hotel, Milton Keynes, Sunday, the 26th of May, 2024. And there's a special code there on screen, UKC10, which will enable UK column viewers to get a discount for that event. So please consider doing that. Everybody who's trying to get the truth and facts and a message out needs our support. Now, we've got another very important event. This is with Channel Islands and UK Alliance. COVID vaccines, the devastating health crisis in the Channel Islands and around the world. The key point being is that there is virtually no support for people who've suffered from vaccine adverse effects in the Channel Islands. And Andrew Bridgen is inviting Jersey and Guernsey to consider those devastating effects. So there's a great line-up. Now, the point is that MPs have already received invitations to join this event. And what we're saying to UK column viewers is please get on to your own MPs to make sure that they will indeed attend to hear what these very professional speakers have got to say. We've also got this one, the Lawful Remedy Roadshow, Self-Preservation for a Sovereign Life, Sunday the 26th of May, 10 to 5 p.m, Assembly Rooms, High Street, Glasgow. It's about power, it's about government and media pressure, and at the end of the day, it's looking at getting people to tackle that and do something about it. Okay, well, Mark, let's welcome you to UK Column News, and you're having a look at net zero.
Yeah, good day, everyone. I was curious, I was pondering this recently. What does net zero mean? What would it look like? And I started thumbing through the internet, and I found that our friends at the World Economic Forum from their lair in Davos, Switzerland, had published this in late 2022. The headline being, these 8 countries have already achieved net zero emissions. Imagine my surprise. Well, let's move on from there. Global action to combat climate change, reading part of this slide, has prompted a wave of national commitments, really, to reach net zero. The US and many others are targeting 2050, which might mean never in a way, with countries like China and India decades later. So we'll give China a free pass because we've moved most manufacturing there, plus the emissions. But a handful of carbon sink countries already have their emissions in check. Net zero is achieved, this is most important, when more carbon dioxide is absorbed from the atmosphere each year than is emitted. Reaching net zero on a global scale is a central part of efforts to prevent global warming exceeding the much ballyhooed 1.5 Celsius climate target. And so on and so forth. I listed the countries. Here's 7 of them, or here's part of them anyway. The ones they referred to are Bhutan, which is landlocked South Asia, mostly forestry and agriculture, a cottage industries at best, 780,000 population. Comoros, a volcanic archipelago of East Africa off the coast. Agriculture is 50% of GDP. Which employs 80% of the labor force. It's basically agrarian. Gabon, if I'm saying that right, the Atlantic coast of Central Africa, largest industries, petroleum, manganese, and timber. So they're heavy petroleum, kind of weird there. Strong links with France, large foreign investments. 1970s, an abundant oil reserve discovered offshore, population 2.3 million. And Guyana, this one's very significant, as we'll see in a couple minutes or less on a video. This is on South America's North Atlantic coast, a massive oil find, a massive oil mining operation, offshore mining, found offshore, has catapulted Guyana from among the lowest performing Latin American countries to the fastest growing economy in the world, we're told, 2 years straight with a population of 808,000. Then we've got Madagascar, Niue, a small island nation, South Pacific Ocean, and Panama, mainly tourism and services, banking, insurance, container ports, population 4.4 million. And then Suriname, ... Moving on from there, the 8th one, Suriname, is a small Amazon nation and is among the most forest-rich countries in the world, with the Amazon rainforest canopy covering 93% of its land mass, and those forests reportedly absorb billions of tons of CO2 and support rich biodiversity. And what this suggests, Brian, is that to be a net zero country, you have to be at best an emerging economy, almost a third world nation economically, and not the high output of the US, for example. So it kind of shows, at least tentatively, where we're going with defining net zero and what net zero countries would look like economically. But here we have the president in this video coming up of Guyana, lecturing, and you'll find this entertaining in a way, a BBC reporter who's trying to lecture him. So this Guyanan president tries to set the record straight on what his country is doing in contending with the BBC reporter. So let's look at this video.
It is expected that there will be $150 billion worth of oil and gas extracted off your coast. That means, according to many experts, more than 2 billion tons of carbon emissions will come from your seabed, from those reserves, and be released into the atmosphere. I don't know if you, as a head of state, went to the COP in Dubai.
Let me stop you right there. Do you know that Guyana has a forest forever that is the size of England and Scotland combined? A forest that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon, a forest that we have kept alive, a forest that we have kept alive.
Does that give you the right? Does that give you the right to release all of this carbon?
Does that give you the right to lecture us on climate change? I am going to lecture you on climate change because we have kept this forest alive that stores 19.5 gigatons of carbon that you enjoy, that the world enjoy, that you don't pay us for, that you don't value, that you don't see a value in, that the people of Guyana has kept alive. Guess what? We have the lowest deforestation rate in the world. And guess what? Even with our greatest exploration of the oil and gas resource we have now, we will still be net zero. Guyana will still be net zero. With all our exploration, we'll still be net zero.
Powerful words, Mr. President. But
I am not completed as yet. I am not finished as yet. I am just not finished as yet. Because this is the hypocrisy that exists in the world. The world in the last 50 years has lost 65% of all its biodiversity. We have kept our biodiversity. Are you valuing it? Are you ready to pay for it? When is the developed world going to pay for it? Or are you in the pockets? Are you in the pockets of those who have damaged the environment? Are you in the pockets, are you and your system in the pockets of those who destroyed the environment through the Industrial Revolution and now lecturing us?
Some very pointed remarks from the Guyana president to that BBC reporter, kind of some informational justice, you might say, as the BBC is great at lecturing others. But one thing I would comment on briefly, Brian, as I wind up this segment, is that even though that president was very forceful and assertive and made some good points, his remarks, unless he's just being obligatory about this, his remarks still support the basic tenets of the globalists, that net zero is important, that preserving forests at all costs and, cutting down any timber, you got to preserve the forest. You can't really use the timber. And so in a way, he's still upholding the narrative, even though he's arguing in the way that the BBC is handling itself and the way it handles these issues. So you can read it different ways, the way that president is talking and what he had to say. But nevertheless, this whole segment points out that the net zero vision necessarily would make countries be well below their potential output economically and stay more or less rated as a developing country and more or less third world in their economic structure. So that kind of doesn't bode well for countries like the UK and the US unless we learn more about it, and that would change our view. So back to you, Brian.
Thank you very much, Mark. I just say that strife and conflict amongst the globalists is always good because it helps delay their plans. So let's look on the bright side of that. Alex, Lord Speaker, what have you got to tell us?
Well, Brian, once the narrative of climate change will kill us all has embedded itself through the efforts of the Stephen Sackers of this world in our minds, and as we look forward to racing ahead to the developmental level of Bhutan and Niue, the question is, what is this bugbear going to be used to achieve? The House of Lords, the upper chamber of the United Kingdom Parliament, used to have presiding over it a Lord Chancellor until the Blair vandalism of 20 years ago and more. The Speaker there is simply now called the Lord Speaker, and he sees fit to maintain an interview series put out on the House of Lords official YouTube channel. Most recently, the Lord Speaker asked, what are the difficulties of regulating artificial intelligence? So we get the twofer here. We get the climate change gremlin and the artificial intelligence bogeyman. And with an unfortunate typo here, because Martin Rees is a household name in Britain and many other countries, the Lord Speaker, or whoever does his typing for him, says the former president of the Royal Society, that is the Society of Societies of Scientists set up in the Restoration era, the 17th century, Lord Martin Rees, who's become Resus's, discusses with me about that on the last episode of Lord Speaker's Corner. Corny pun. Let's have a look at just a minute and a little of what Marvin Rees said. And of course, it's him who's saying it, Martin Rees, sorry. But the Lord Speaker is allowing him to say it. And he's calling for world government under the more pleasant sounding name of supranational.
And you've advocated the establishment of national institutions to fight climate change and others with an appropriate regulatory framework. Does that apply to AI as well as these other subjects?
Certainly. I think the special problem of AI is that the main players are now multinational conglomerates, as we know, which are dominating the world's market. It's very hard to tax these companies properly. And for the same reason, it's going to be very hard to enforce regulations on them. But I think we've got to try, and it's good that a start's being made in a number of ways to try and get agreed regulations. But of course, the fact that there's a few really dominant players in the market makes it more difficult for nations to assert themselves, even in collaboration. But I think it's very important to ensure that there is regulation of these new technologies.
And that was, as you can tell from the corny music, the selected highlight put out by the Lord Speaker and his team personally. And if you want the full interview, which will be linked in the show notes, here it is on the House of Lords UK YouTube channel. The Astronomer Royal, Lord Rhys of Ludlow, speaking to Lord Speaker on this episode 16 of Lord Speaker's Corner. Is this just a bit untoward, or is there more to it? Well, constitutionally, not much is going to happen because, for one thing, this was speech, not writing, so it won't qualify under any kind of constitutional crimes of writing. But you did hear a clear call there for His Majesty's government to be put in abeyance to global government. If we look at the legislative record here, an obscure section of an obscure act, Section 73 of the UK-wide Coroners and Justice Act 2009, under Gordon Brown, abolished or pretended to abolish by statute the common law offence of seditious libel. Now, sedition, in the US known specifically as seditious speech, and it's been prosecuted under that, is still very much a common law offence federally and at levels below that. Seditious libel and the offences under B and C that have likewise been repealed, or I should say annulled, are of course only writing. But sedition is very real. It is calling for the overthrow of His Majesty's government, of our sovereignty, of the established order in church and state, and it has a multi-century history of being prosecuted in every English-speaking jurisdiction. I doubt it will be, but I put it to you that that may be a qualification of seditious speech. And while we're on Scottish politicians, people will have heard that the current Lord Speaker there hails from Dumbarton. He is personally a success story, to give him his due. He left school without qualifications, and thanks to the Open University and his own application, he managed to get very far in life. But it just brings me back to what Diane was telling us a moment ago. We're not quite onto the Dutch Parliament yet. Diane was telling us a moment ago that there is now support from Jackson Carlaw, who, at least the last I knew, was Deputy Leader of the Scottish Conservatives, and from the Scottish Liberal Democrats, Alex Cole-Hamilton. Now, these men are quite sincere in their support for the Fenethy ladies. But yet, if you put their names, or indeed the name of the former Deputy First Minister of Scotland, John Swinney, with an EY, into ukcolumn.org, you will find questions about their record in the past, particularly over this over-eagerness to do their best by children, which has led, in the case of Carlaw, them to say, we should ban home education, in as many words. Alex Cole-Hamilton was a great cheerleader for the named person scheme. But you have to bear in mind that they're doing what they can within the moral framework they can, and that is set by the Stephen Sackers of this world at the BBC. So this earworm of climate change is a gateway to global government. Likewise, is something that could perhaps be brought out of the minds of these politicians if we write to them in enough numbers. Just very quickly, at the end of this segment then, the Dutch Parliament, as reported here by Dr. Meryl Nass, a very well-known dissident doctor and writer now. Here she's writing at Door to Freedom. The Dutch Parliament, a few days ago, the 16th, voted at the beginning of its order of business for the day to instruct the minister, Mrs. Pia Dijkstra, she's still in office because we don't have a new government yet, but the holdover from the last government, responsible for WHO negotiations. She's been instructed by a majority of the 150-strong Dutch lower chamber, the House of Representatives, to delay voting on the World Health Organization on both of its instruments, the treaty and the regulations that Mark and others have been reporting on. And if they cannot secure a delay, the instructions in The Hague from the parliamentarians are to vote no by default. And for those who want to see the original documentation, just to blow that up for a moment, here is the order. It won't necessarily go through given the Dutch constitutional arrangement, but it will carry much weight. Order that the minister should ask for a delay on voting on the amendments and thus also on the international health regulations and the new pandemic treaty at the World Health Assembly, and if not, to vote against. There is the mainstream Dutch paper that picked up on it, the legacy title, De Telegraaf. So those who read Dutch or use translation machines can see that. On screen at the moment is a summary in English produced by Dr. Meryl Nass's article on what's going on. So a very significant indication, not only on this issue, but more widely, that the Dutch Parliament may also now consist of a majority of people who are sufficiently aware of public opinion not to ram through such monstrosities.
Alex, thank you very much for that. And we're going to move back to Mark now, who's going to be talking about the World Bank.
Indeed. The World Bank, of course, holds the annual spring meetings in D.C. There's another slide prior to this one, I believe. But anyway, these are some samplings of World Bank and IMF topics that took place last week. I was going to report this ahead of time, but it got delayed. So now this is after the fact for the 2024 spring meetings, which are typically held in D.C. I covered them in person 11 years ago. And a quick footnote on that was one thing I picked up on 11 years ago when I was there was that countries that did not change their family policies, countries that moved away from traditional nuclear marriages, nuclear families, and would go more for putting women into the workforce as an obligatory thing, they would get more funding and more favorable funding terms, things like that. But some of the topics last week, let's go back one. Just a quick summary to the slide before that. Civil Society Policy Forum, the path for taxing the super rich, which has always been a kind of an elusive thing. Climate financing for African small developed states, closing the gap. That kind of ties into my World Economic Forum thing earlier about what defines net zero. And making the new loss and damage fund a success. Recommendations by climate vulnerable civil society. So there's all sorts of funds tying into climate change and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals, all 17 of them of the UN. That's all hardwired into this. We'll move on from there. And I believe we have the basic wrap-up video. This is produced by the World Bank itself. It's brief, but it gives you the basic rudiments of what they talked about and the thrust of it. So we'll watch this video.
Hello and welcome to Washington, D.C., where we're wrapping up the World Bank Group and IMF spring meetings. It's been a busy week. The focus for us this year was on how the World Bank Group can turn its vision of creating a world free of poverty on a livable planet into real impact. We're becoming a better bank, faster, more effective, more ambitious. On Wednesday, President Ajay Banga announced a commitment to connect 300 million Africans to affordable energy by 2030 in partnership with the African Development Bank. On Thursday, we unveiled another commitment to expand quality, affordable health services to 1.5 billion people, also by 2030. To close the week, 11 countries announced 11 billion in commitments to 3 innovative financing tools at the World Bank Group to greatly scale up financing for development. We will also partner with other multilateral development banks on a new co-financing platform. There was a big focus on IDA, our fund which provides grants and low-interest loans to help countries invest in the future of people and planet. We're heading into the IDA 21 replenishment, so you'll be hearing much more about IDA in the days and weeks to come. But for now, goodbye from the 2024 spring meetings.
So as you can see, Brian, all very upbeat. It reveals a little bit about what they're doing, but for this report, the big thing is the from vision to impact, which was mentioned, it's mentioned in the first slide for those that might review the show on the archive and things like that and look at the show notes. But I looked it up. From Vision to Impact is a significant paper, World Bank Group Evolution, And one could say a lot about it. It's got the financing model list on one side, the new playbook on the other side. But the IDA, the International Development Association of the World Bank, and that ongoing funding mechanism is what's really significant. It's listed actually in the next slide. So it's not shown at the top of the proverbial list, but the IDA 21 launch is mentioned there. And moving on from there, it's helpful to define and explain what that is. IDA 21 replenishment. The 21st replenishment of the International Development Association is critical in responding to global challenges and seizing opportunities for change. An ambitious IDA 21 will serve as a lifeline for a world in crisis. Multiple crises have hindered global development, endangered lives and livelihoods, and left many poor countries in debt, which is a very misleading thing to talk about countries being in debt as if the World Bank and IMF have nothing to do with that. IDA has a proven track record, they claim, of improving conditions in the poorest countries, and it'll catalyze investments in women and youth empowerment. There's that theme again, to kind of overturn the traditional home and to put women in the workforce as a economic and cultural obligation, as a precondition for getting funding in many cases. Of course, energy access, climate goals, digitalization, job creation, etc., to end poverty on a livable planet. That's a kind of sideways referral to climate change again. Moving on from there, the World Bank's IDA is a game changer. This is another video, and this will explain it a little more in depth.
Of children's rights. IDA is hugely important to the work that the International Rescue Committee do as one of the largest sources of finance for some of the countries that are most in need, that are furthest behind on achieving the Sustainable Development Goals and are most climate vulnerable.
IDA is really the best, most impactful, most flexible instrument for people living in the poorest countries, funding education systems, health systems.
Only 15% of the goals are on track to be met, which means that we need to shake up our strategies. We need some star players and some game-changing wins in order that we might get back on track in the second half. And I think IDA is the biggest game changer we could hope for.
No country can solve some of the issues that we're facing alone. We have to work together and we need leadership. And if you're in a position of power and you can, this is a mechanism that you and your country should absolutely support.
For Project Everyone, IDA is important because it is really one of the star players that will help get the global goals done.
This People and Planet Fund that IDA is the best investment in terms of its leverage with other resources and the way in which it provides this background connective glue for lots of other investments to do better.
In development, in building resilience to climate shocks, and in supporting a safer world.
Look at the results, look at how much a return on investment you can get for this. It is a win-win for all people.
My message to donor countries is really very simple. Poorer countries did not cause COVID. They didn't cause the spike in interest rates. They didn't cause the conflict that has driven up food prices. They didn't cause climate change. But poorer countries are at the sharp end of all of those problems. And if we're serious as an international community about delivering the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030, what we have to do is really simple. We have to make sure that IDA 21 is fully funded.
So there you go. Yeah, poor countries didn't cause interest rates to go up, but banking policies did. And of course, the world's central banks and the World Bank and the IMF are all part of that banking machine. Quickly, how does the IDA work? It's overseen by its 174 shareholder countries, which comprise the Board of Governors. The day-to-day development and work of IDA is managed by the World Bank operational staff, etc. It's historically been funded largely by contributions from the governments of its member countries. So largely taxpayers, regardless of whatever private donors might take place, Brian. And we have one other slide, and there's an important part of this. I could go into all of this. I'll just mention it very briefly. IDA borrowers, earlier in the literature I read and the little bit of research I did, they kept using the word grants. I picked up on that word being used. A grant you would typically think would not have to be paid back. But IDA borrowers have significant needs for concessional funds. et cetera, et cetera. If you go down to the one before the last item, when it gets into the qualifications, it says nations that lack credit worthiness to borrow on market terms and therefore have a need for concessional resources to finance the country's development program. So to be eligible for funds, you cannot lack credit worthiness to borrow on market terms. So what it really means here is another debt machine disguised as charity, funded by the taxpayers, Brian. So that's what it crunches out to be. And that's not surprising from the World Bank system, but there hasn't been a lot of reporting on its spring meetings in recent years. So this gives us a little bit of a refresher course.
Okay, Mark, thank you for that. We'll jump ahead a little bit because you had some detail about some contact details in relation to that report. We'll make sure that they go up on the show notes. All right, let's end today with a trip back to Scotland. And Diane, I think you've got a little bit more to tell us about Humza, Mr. Humza.
Yes. Mr. Humza has had a bad couple of weeks. I will start by saying that his hate crime bill has made him incredibly unpopular. A poll from just a few days ago said that he has fallen from January in popularity by minus 15 points. And currently 29% of SNP supporters at the last election do not approve of his job currently. Also, on the 9th of April, just before that poll came out, his brother-in-law was charged with abduction and extortion in a case linked to a man who died in a hospital in Dundee on the 10th of January, I believe it was, which we could say is personal, anything to do with him, but really did not set him up for the next few days that he was going to have. So we can see here 5 days ago on Twitter, he said, as the largest pro-independence party at this general election, the SNP is best placed to advance the cause of independence, get rid of every Tory MP in Scotland. I think he forgets sometimes that we are still part of the UK, and ensure Scotland's voice is heard. And we have a lot of these kinds of sarcastic responses. Jack is one of many, saying things like, translation, the SNP will advance the cause of Islam, get rid of right Christians, and ensure women's rights are ended. Fix that for you. You're welcome. So we're not seeing a whole lot of support for Humza on social media now. We go on to Thursday last week. We see that the SNP's net zero secretary, Mary McAdie, has accepted that the net zero reduction targets are 2030 are now unobtainable. Surprise, surprise, right? So the problem here is that this is now in question, the coalition that they did have with the Scottish Greens. The Scottish Greens are not very happy. They're also not very happy with the results of the CAS report and what's going on with the LGBT agenda. So that is starting to fall apart as well. If we go on, also on Thursday, Nicola Sturgeon's husband, Peter Murrell, who I'd like to call Mr. Sturgeon, has been rearrested over the embezzlement of funds from the SNP. So this happened already a couple of months ago. He's brought back in, and it's expected, obviously, to be pretty serious. So this was back a few weeks ago, I believe, when he was first arrested. It was last year, sorry. And then from here, we go on to Saturday. We had an independence march in Glasgow. How did that go? Well, we had someone who drove into the march as they were proceeding from the West End into the city centre. We see there was a police person trying to stop the car by placing their hand on the bonnet of the car. But however, an SNP councillor decided to comment before they knew what was going on, that it was obviously far-right extremism that was the reason for this person driving into the parade, which was not the cause at all. As we found out later on, it was a man who's now been arrested on drug charges and driving issues. So they got to George Square in the city centre. We have some people trying to show that there's all these blue SNP supporters and Scottish flags going on. But if you look at the actual webcam from the top of the city chambers looking down, as McAdie said there are not many #Believe in Scotland, which was the name of the group that organized the event. So from here, where do we go? Well, it's not looking good for the SNP. It's not really looking good for anyone up here, but I certainly don't expect that they will be winning at the next election. Maybe Labour, who knows? But it's all up in the air from here right now, Brian.
Okay, Diane, well, we've got chaos and turbulence everywhere in this country. Meanwhile, the globalist agenda and those Agenda 2030 goals are all-encompassing for every national government in the world. So, yeah, troubled times. Alex, I think you're going to end the news today with a a particular image. What have you got for us?
Yes, I'm afraid it is an AI designed one. I don't know the name of the artist. I'll gladly give credit if someone tells me who. But bearing in mind the debate we just heard between President Mohammed Irfan Ali of Guyana and Stephen Sacker of the BBC on net zero, and given Mark's extra details, here we are. A neo-caveman family, hideously white, some people would call them in today's cultural climate, are living in their grotto, and eating their legumes, and the father of the family, who's reverted to patriarchal type with his big beard and pectorals, says, net zero, we've done it, we're saved. I shared this on my Telegram channel, Eastern Approaches, the other day, and somebody pointed out that those fires are going to have to go because they're wood-based, certainly in Scotland.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much for that. I'll just say before we end that I made a mistake talking about the Lawful Remedy Roadshow, 26th of May, 10 o'clock in the morning till 5. I think I said Glasgow. I meant Glastonbury down in the West Country. So apologies to the team there, but we've now corrected it. We must end today's news. Thank you all very much for joining us, and stay with the UK Column channel for the playing out of Playing God, an investigation into medical democide in the UK. Thank you for joining us.